Welcome back to the podcast, guys. I cannot believe we are at episode 52 already. That means that I have been doing this podcast for an entire year, and that feels really good. I gotta be honest. There's certainly been some weeks where I have not felt like putting up a podcast episode, or I've just not had any ideas. It's not an easy thing to do, to just continuously put out content. Let me just say that. But you guys have really been a big part of keeping this podcast going. I really have to say that because of those times when I was really struggling for figuring out what kind of show I wanted to put on, what kind of topic I wanted to cover, I really would usually, almost every time would come to you guys and ask you either in Sync Academy or just get some of your great comments or emails, and you guys would let me know exactly what you're struggling with and what kind of topics you want me to go in detail with. And that actually is why this week we're going to be talking about how you can sound quote unquote expensive having a limited budget. And that was actually from a YouTube comment. So that's why we're going with that topic for this week's episode. So please let that be proof that I want to hear from you guys, because the more that you reach out and let me know about what you're confused about, what your points of interest are, just whatever you want to learn about this business, I am here to help you out in any way that I possibly can. So please don't be shy about that. There are no stupid questions. Just reach out and let me know what you're struggling with. Which does bring me to my next point, though, before we jump into this week's topic, which is that as I've completed this full year of the podcast, which I'm really proud of and I'm really happy about, I am going to need to slow down the release of these new episodes for a couple of reasons. Number one, obviously, I'm about to be a father and our due date is in a couple of weeks here. So that is going to basically start to take up a lot of my time, obviously, and energy and focus. And I don't want to have a very full plate with the content that I'm putting out while I have priorities of, being a father and having a newborn in the house and all the things that obviously I'm going to need to do with all that. So part of it's just about a little bit of self-care, making sure that I'm not overextended and pushed out too far. And the second issue, or the second reason why I want to slow down it, is because I do want to sort of change the format of my podcast a little bit and maybe actually add a little bit more production value to it. Because right now, essentially what I do is, I have some notes written up and then I basically just record, my thoughts about this topic, and I kind of go through my notes and then I hit stop, and that's basically it. But I do want to experiment maybe with something a little bit more, I guess you could call it polished, and maybe something that requires a little bit more editing, and maybe also bringing in other people as a regular part of the podcast to kind of have it make it more of sort of a group chat. We did that a little bit during the, actually a lot during the COVID sort of the heightened shutdown that was going on during the COVID situation. I had Trevor and Mike join me for almost every episode for at least, I think, 3 months, maybe even more. So that was really fun to do. So I kind of want to get back into that a little bit. Maybe not every single week, but definitely start to have more of a sort of interview, co-host, kind of a chat back and forth format. Because I'm just finding that, doing these by myself, they can be rewarding, they can be fun, but they're not nearly as fun as when I'm chatting with somebody else about the business. For me, it's just a lot more enjoyable. And as I've told you guys, if you're not having fun doing something, you're doing it wrong. And so I'm realizing I need to include more people in this. I need to maybe try a different approach because I want to enjoy this every single time. And some weeks, I'll just be honest, it's not as fun as I was hoping it was going to be. It feels sometimes like pulling teeth to get these topics to come out because, I've been doing I've been doing my YouTube channel for 4 years, been doing this podcast now for a year. You feel like at some point you've covered every possible topic you can think of, but it's not true. There's always something else out there. But I always find that when you collaborate with others, sometimes those ideas sort of bubble up to the surface, and it's much more enjoyable, at least for me, to have those conversations. So stay tuned. For right now, what I'm going to do is probably promise you guys one episode per month. So right now you've been getting them every single week. So we're going to slow that down quite a bit, just to one per month. But they're going to be great. They're going to be awesome, high quality, episodes. You guys will still enjoy that. So for now, just know that I will continue on with my YouTube channel, 2 uploads per week. So if you are loving the content I'm putting out, you can always come to my YouTube channel, and that will continuously be going on throughout the newborn situation here and everything that's going on past that. I don't plan on slowing that down. But yeah, just this podcast needs to be a little bit more spread out so that I have a little bit more time for my new life sort of beginning here, the new exciting things that are coming my way. So with that out of the way, let's get into this week's topic, which is how can you sound expensive with a limited budget? And everybody listening now has a limited budget. Probably 1 out of 1,000 of you probably have the kind of income where you can literally put down thousands of dollars on the exact kind of equipment that you know would be your ideal, let's say, mixing console and speakers and plugins and, outboard gear and all that kind of stuff. So very few of you guys probably have that kind of resource. Most of us are on a shoestring budget. And I know that for pretty much most of my licensing career, I was as well. And so I want to give you guys some of the tips that I use to make sure that I was creating the highest quality music that I possibly could in terms of like sonic quality with having basically no money, really like next to no money. And if you guys need to know, if you're not aware of how little money I had in the beginning, my first studio setup was two pretty much cardboard boxes with a mirror, like a long body mirror turned upside down on top of those two boxes. That was my desk. Okay, that was my high quality desk. I had I think there were some headphones that I had borrowed from my day job, which were, I don't know, they were probably nice, like Sony headphones, but certainly not designed for mixing music or anything like that. I worked at a place where we did a lot more video work, so they're more for monitoring your video input. So it wasn't professional mixing. I remember having, let's see, I think I did buy a Apogee Duet, which was I think $500 at the time. That was my audio interface. And other than that, pretty much whatever came with my Logic Pro. So I was using a MacBook, not even a MacBook Pro, but just a plain MacBook, tiny little 13-inch laptop, and Logic Pro. Whatever plugins and sounds came with Logic Pro, that's basically what I got started with. I was not even investing in any other plugins, any other sounds, or anything like that. So I'm just telling all that to let you know that I am not a stranger to low budget production, okay? And even in those humble beginnings, I was able to get started, get my foot in the door with a library, and get better. I mean, that's really what it took for me to get better, is just to start somewhere, and that's where I started, okay? So I have 4 quick principles here, I think, that'll kind of help you decide how to make sure you're making the wise decisions with the limited money that you do have for what do you invest in, and also not getting confused, because I think a lot of producers think that if they don't have the expensive equipment, they can't create high quality music, and that is not true at all. And I'm going to hopefully prove that to you in this podcast. Okay, so the first thing is you need to prioritize the gear or the samples or the plugins or whatever that you really need, okay? So you need to basically probably write this down on a piece of paper and have a wants list and a needs list, okay? So if you're brand new to producing and you're seeing all these incredible studio setups and home studios, and you're like, wow, I want this, I want this, I want that, but you really don't even have a DAW program, let's say, right? Like you don't have Logic Pro, or you don't have Pro Tools or Ableton or Fruity Loops or whatever DAW you prefer that you think you want to work with. Well, that would be a sort of needs list, because you're going to need to have a computer with that software plugin, that program there. So you obviously need to start at your more basic level. Now, I know that's probably obvious for everybody listening, but wherever you are, there's probably something else that is your obvious next level for where you need to go. So right now, let's say you've got your DAW, but you've been basically mixing on your computer speakers, or maybe just some kind of cheap speakers you got from like Staples, right? Those like $100 little cheap ones that, they're doing something for you, but they're not really creating you're not getting an accurate view of what your music is doing. Well, I think your next level would be getting better speakers, right? Either you're going to get professional speakers. I personally use Adam's A7 speakers. I think they're incredible. When I bought them, I think they were around $500 each. So it was not super cheap, but also it's not like the most expensive speakers you can get out there. But being able to hear your music that you're producing accurately is so important. It's basically one of those, it's got to be on your needs, because if you're thinking that your music sounds great, right? And your speakers that are not particularly meant for monitoring music production, they sound awesome and well balanced and all that kind of stuff, and you keep sending it out to libraries, your album, you keep sending it out, and then you keep getting rejected. You're like, well, these people are just nuts. Like, my music sounds great. It might be literally that you are filtering and coloring your own music, and that's what most speakers that are not in the professional grade are doing. Is they're purposely, this is what their manufacturers want them to do. They want them to sound great. So sometimes they will artificially crank up the low end or crank up the high end or whatever it is. So you're not really getting an accurate representation of what your music is doing. So you need to prioritize what exactly is the next step for you to make sure that you are being you're taking your music career professionally and not duping yourself and getting high on your own supply, right? So another thing could be right now, maybe you are composing most of your tracks with a tiny little MIDI keyboard because that's all you could afford. But you find that because it's such a small keyboard, or maybe you're using your literal, like your typing keyboard because you don't even have a MIDI keyboard, that's slowing your production time down because it takes you so long to find the right key, and you can't do all your you can't, compose all your tracks at the same time. You have to basically go back and re-record things and edit things. So if the equipment you're using in the form of your MIDI keyboard or whatever is slowing you down, that should be on the needs list. That should be something you save up for to get the proper MIDI keyboard or whatever it is that you need to speed up your production. So think about that in terms of what's slowing you down right now. If there's something that's literally making you drag your feet and taking so much longer to get your tracks done, that's something to prioritize. That would include like your computer. So if you have a computer that's a little on the older side, and every time you hit record or whatever, you got errors and it's crashing on you, and your tracks are not being saved or whatever, you might need to think about updating, your RAM, or getting a new SSD drive in there, or whatever it is, maybe a brand new computer. But if you are literally, your workflow is not working out for you, that is a sign that that's no longer a sort of, it'd be nice. It's like, this is a need for you right now. You really need to speed up your production time. Okay. And by the way, if you hear banging and hammers and all kinds of weird stuff going on, there's a house being built right next door to me right now. So I do apologize for that. I did not think they were going to start working today as I recorded this, but it looks like they are. So hopefully it's quiet and enough in the background that it's not too distracting. All right, second up here, we need to talk about that the high quality samples and plugins that you do invest in are a must, okay? This is one of those things where I want to be very careful though, because my next point is going to seemingly contradict this, but I do want to make this point because one of the biggest reasons why, because I've been doing this for 4 years now, reviewing so many people's music, so many people's tracks. I've been coaching so many people, and I hear so much music, especially from those in the syndicate, obviously in Sync Academy and all that stuff. The number one reason why a lot of producers' tracks are just not high quality, they're not going to be accepted by a library, they're not going to be competitive. It's not that their ideas are not great. It's not that their mixes maybe even aren't like loud and impactful. It's that the samples and the plugins and the libraries that they're pulling these songs, these sounds from, are just not high quality. And so the tracks end up sounding sort of like this cheap karaoke version of a track, right? They kind of sound like a Casio keyboard performed all the instruments. And so, the electric guitars sound like a fake guitar. The drums don't sound like a real drummer performed it. The strings sound very keyboardish, and just very fake and artificial, right? So if you're using low quality samples, but you got high quality ideas, it doesn't matter what you do. It's never going to get to the point where your tracks are going to be competitive, because those low quality samples just sort of scream amateur. That's what they're doing, is they just sound like somebody who does not know what they're doing, is not taking this seriously enough, is not doing all that they possibly can to bring their tracks up to a more professional level. The whole trick with what we do here is, even though we're most of the time not using any live instruments, I mean, let's just be honest, like my keyboard is my only instrument these days for the most part, but we need to make our tracks sound like they really were performed by a live orchestra or a live rock band or whatever it is, right? Exceptions would be, of course, hip hop, EDM, that kind of thing. Those are more the DJ, beat maker sort of a vibe. But for everything else, you really need to make sure that there has like a human feel to it. So it's fooling the listener into thinking that there was a live performance with this. So if your samples that you're using just don't sound live or realistic enough, you're going to be wasting a lot of time, maybe with really high quality ideas, and high quality productions that you're going with. But because you're not actually using the proper tools, no matter what you do, it's just going to look terrible. I always make the analogy that if you were wanting to become a professional painter, and instead of just buying the professional grade paints, you went and got melted crayons or something like that, or found stuff that, you had mixed different kinds of paints, and they were all just sort of like, from the dollar store, and they were low quality and that kind of thing. It doesn't matter that you're an amazing, beautiful painter. You might create something kind of cool, but if you're not using the proper tools, it's just not going to shine as much as it possibly can. Same thing when you're a chef, right? So if you want to cook a really delicious home-cooked meal, but you're using, canned ingredients, like low-quality stuff, pre-seasoned stuff, packaged stuff that has a lot of preservatives and stuff that's been frozen for a long time, Is it going to have that fresh, delicious taste? No, you're going to need stuff that's like the highest quality ingredients, right? You need to get stuff that you just got today. Is preferably something if you can pick it right out of a garden right away, right? You go to the highest quality source you possibly can. Like if you want to do fish, you want to get something that was just caught literally in the last couple of days. You don't want to get something that was frozen for months before you defrosted it and cooked it, right? It's going to taste just terrible. It's not even going to be close to what fresh caught fish is going to taste like. So that's what we're doing here, is we want to make sure we're getting the freshest, high quality stuff. Okay. The really cool thing is that these days, you don't have to be a millionaire to afford a lot of this stuff. Maybe just 5 years ago, most high quality plugins like, string libraries and drums and just a lot of high quality stuff, they didn't have these subscription options. So you would have to spend $1,000 or $2,000 to get that stuff. And that stuff's gone now. And these companies realize that is not feasible for producers, that are just getting started, that don't have thousands of dollars lying around to throw on that kind of stuff. So these days, almost everything you can find is probably at the most $19.99 a month. Maybe you'll find it a little bit more for some, but most of them are going to be maybe even $9.99 a month, or really cheap stuff. I personally have told you guys many times that I use splice.com for a lot of, especially when I do EDM, hip hop, that kind of stuff. They're really great for getting those drums and samples and synths and all that kind of stuff. So $10 a month, or actually I think it was like $8.99 a month. It might have been like, or $7.99 actually. I think it's $8 a month. Whatever it is, it's really cheap, and it gives you 100 plugins or 100 downloads you can get a month, which for me has been more than enough for what I need. But you can obviously get more than as you want. So there's so many out there. I'm not going to recommend any particular ones. The ones that I have recommended and plugins and that kind of thing, we've done in the plugins and palettes series within Sync Academy. But there are way too many to mention. But you need to do your own research. But you'll find now these days that almost all of them have a really cheap subscription plan. So obviously, do you need to go get an entire, string orchestra bundle of all these sounds? Well, if you're going to do orchestral music, absolutely. And if it's something that you think is going to be your primary focus for the next couple of years, then yeah, get the highest quality that you can afford. I absolutely recommend that. But that doesn't mean you need to go hog wild and just buy a bunch of different stuff because you think you might need it. Wait until you absolutely know you do need it, and then go get the subscription and make sure that you're getting your money's worth and you're actually using this stuff, right? All right, so next up, this is where it's going to get a little confusing because it's going to sound like I'm kind of contradicting myself, but I will try not to. And this is that the overall quality of your music, right? Not only just the sonic quality, but how the music moves the listener, like emotionally, how it pulls you in, how the mix feels, how the master is, all that kind of stuff. That ultimately always comes down to skill, not necessarily just the products that you're buying and using, okay? The story of this is that I used to have a friend that would be a junkie when it came down to buying gear, okay? Just an absolute gear junkie. Some of you guys are guilty of that, and that's all right. But this guy would buy every possible plugin, every possible outboard gear, everything he could possibly can. He was, luckily he was blessed to have some resources to be able to do this. But literally, if there was a new microphone that was $5,000 and it was the one that happened to be used by, let's say, Jay-Z on an album, he would be the producer that would go buy it because it was more expensive and because big people had used it, and he just thought that that's how you sound good, is you got to buy all the big expensive stuff. And after having, I don't know how many, just hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of stuff in his studio, I would hear his tracks, and this is not to be mean or anything, but his tracks just lacked soul. Like, they weren't really interesting in terms of pulling me in and along for the ride. They had a high sonic quality to them, like the drums sounded huge and the synths and all the stuff he was doing, it sounded great. But musically, I was like, I could just not listen to that one again. It just didn't do anything for me. It felt just very square. Not a lot of true, authentic feeling came through the music. It felt actually, obviously, overproduced. It just sounded like there was just way too much effect going on and not enough just human heart and human soul, okay? So that's something to just keep in mind, even after I just told you to really step up your quality of your samples and your plugins that you're using. Don't get carried away with it to the point where you think that is going to carry you to having high quality music, because it ultimately comes down to the pilot, right? It's not just the plane. It's not just the build of the plane. It's how the pilot is steering the plane, which is how smooth the ride's going to be for you, okay? So you are the pilot when it comes to your music production. So even though you have high quality gear and high quality samples, does that mean that your tracks will automatically be compelling and pulling the listener along the ride for this emotional story that you want to tell? Not necessarily, okay? It certainly is not going to guarantee it. I will tell you that. That's a for sure thing. So just don't mistake yourself for thinking that as long as I have all this high quality stuff and I've spent the money, right, on all these things, then I should just have high quality stuff. At the end of the day, you need to make whatever you have sound great. In fact, I did this on purpose. One of the first tutorials that I ever released, it's now in Sync Academy, called it used to be called the Producing, Mixing, and Mastering course. So it's basically I think a 20-part series where I go from having nothing in my Logic Pro session to creating, producing and mixing and mastering an entire track 100% within Logic Pro, with the plugins and the sounds and everything that you can get within Logic Pro. The only exception is where I plugged in a guitar. So obviously a real guitar does not come with Logic Pro. So I did record that. And then my vocals, I did a little bit of background vocals. So other than those two things, everything else was inside of Logic Pro. And very, very, if I don't say so myself, a very high quality track was able to be produced. And that was actually the first and only time that I've ever done that. And I did that on purpose to prove to, all the members that you don't need to go spend thousands of dollars. Logic Pro is $200, and that comes with the DAW software and enough sounds to get you started with almost any genre that you possibly could need to, okay? So that's what I'm just trying to tell you guys. It's really about getting your fingers on these programs and not only looking towards just substituting hard work for buying your way through it. There really are no shortcuts for just doing the work, okay? And then the last point I want to finish this episode on is how important it is to really get feedback on your music and always look for ways that you can improve, okay? So when you are just cranking out tons and tons of music and you're getting high on your own supply for months maybe, and you have no idea if your tracks are really in line, if they're competitive, if they're feeling like there's something that can really do well in this business, and then you submit to some libraries and get rejected, that could really, really hurt, right? To think that you are on the right track and then find out like, whoa, like maybe I wasn't on the right track. So it is important with all this stuff, with your samples, with your plugins, with the skills, with your, ability to start using all this new stuff that you're going to invest in, to really get some other ears on your music, really not just live in your own little echo chamber thinking that you're great and, playing it for your girlfriend or your wife and having them say that they love everything that you do, which is awesome and that really supports us. But that's not really the kind of feedback that's going to get you to where you want to go. You're going to need some honest feedback, okay? So if you have, other friends, colleagues, other producers that you trust, that you love, their ears, and you really think that they can provide some great feedback for you, ask for it. Reach out to them. Send them some tracks. Ask them, it's like, hey, please be honest with me. Let me know what works, what doesn't work. Try to get that feedback as best you possibly can. If you don't have that, we have an awesome group inside of Sync Academy called the Feedback Corner. And that's pretty much the most popular feature of Sync Academy. And so if you join us or you are a member, you can upload any, we basically limit it to one track per week. We want to make sure that it's not getting spammed, but upload any track you'd like to and ask for feedback from the entire community. We have over 1,000 members now and they are loving it. They love giving feedback, positive, constructive feedback, not necessarily just cheerleading each other on and saying, hey, you're great, you're awesome, but giving them, giving each other specific things. Here's how you can do this better. Here's maybe something that I feel is kind of lacking in your mix, or maybe your snare drum is getting a little bit lost in the mix or whatever it is. And you maybe have never been aware of that stuff. And I've seen it because I give a lot of feedback to the syndicate members, right? And so a lot of times I'll get this note back after I've given them feedback and they'll say, wow, I never knew that I was lacking in my drums. Like I thought my drums were great. And now I'm realizing that absolutely, as I hear your feedback and now I'm kind of comparing my music to reference tracks, and now it's becoming clear to me that I have work to do with my drums. And that's how you know you're growing, is when you start to realize that there were things you were hiding from yourself, or you just couldn't even see it. You couldn't even hear it, rather, right? You can't even hear where you're maybe not living up to your full potential. And that's what getting feedback helps you do, is start to pick away those little blind spots that we all have. I still have them. I just have less than I had, 12 years ago when I got started in this business. So if you're not getting feedback or on a regular basis, I really think that that's one of those very, very important things to, no matter how high quality your home studio setup is, how, limited it is, it doesn't matter. Getting feedback is going to help you progress in any area that you are, in any sort of phase that you are in your sort of home setup, right? So that's it, guys. That's how I wanted to end the first year's podcast episode. I can't believe it. Episode 52. I'm really excited, really happy. And thank you guys all for being here with me for this ride for this year. It's been an awesome, beautiful, wonderful journey. It's really cool to even have gotten some emails from some of you guys that you discovered me through this podcast. And some of you guys never discovered me through my YouTube channel. You only heard me first here. And so that's really cool to get those emails that you guys have actually discovered me and discovered sync licensing maybe through this podcast. That always means a lot to me. I love hearing that. So for now, this will be the last sort of weekly episode you guys hear from me. So I will definitely have another one up within a month. I don't know exactly what the date will be. It'll probably be on another Friday. I tend to like releasing these things on Friday, but don't hold me to that. We'll see what works out. But I do appreciate your guys' patience on that. And stay tuned. Obviously, we're going to have new episodes. They're just going to be at the slower pace, but they're still going to be just as high quality and just as informative and hopefully motivational for all of you guys listening. So you guys have a fantastic month, and we'll talk to you guys really soon. Thank you for listening to the Sync My Music podcast. If you enjoyed the show and want me to do more episodes, all that I ask is that you leave me a review on whatever platform or app that you're listening to. It just takes a few seconds. I'll never charge for this podcast, and I want to keep it 100% ad-free. And your review right now will help me do just that. Thank you so much.